Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, October 28th, 2022. Time for another show. This is the way we do things each weekday morning. Happy birthday to son number one off at college, almost assuredly. I promise you he's not listening to this podcast. It's all he could do to get away from having to hear this podcast. And time is running out as he's ending his college career shortly. It's getting on in years already, but time to kick off another college career shortly as well. That student out the door to the bus. Fingers crossed that all is okay. No, you never can tell when the bus is coming. I think it's coming late these days. Should be okay, but boy, what a madhouse in the morning. All right, well, things are going crazy everywhere, including this weird news item that landed in my mailbox shortly before coming on the air, and I see Justice has seen it too. Some strange and possibly disturbing news from the West Coast, where news doesn't start for another couple of hours. Paul Pelosi, husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, assaulted at his home, in their home. Assaulted. The story isn't developed enough yet for them to even have a decent headline to it. Paul Pelosi assaulted by home by assailant. That's what assailants do. They assault you, assail you, I suppose. But still seems like the same route, and they could have worked harder on it. But anyway, it's brand new headline, just posted at The Hill some 10 minutes ago. So people scrambling for news. No word yet on exactly what happened. Here's what they've got written up so far. Paul Pelosi, the husband of Speaker Nancy Pelosi, of course, was violently assaulted at their residence in San Francisco early Friday morning after an assailant broke in, according to a statement from the Speaker's office. Speaker Pelosi was not in San Francisco at the time, according to her spokesman, Drew Hamill. Paul Pelosi was taken to a hospital and is expected to make a, quote, full recovery. And you know how I feel about that phrase. It's often not the case. But they say as long as you don't die, you make a full recovery. So who knows? It could be very mild. It could be there were no injuries at all, and they just took him to the hospital for precautionary purposes and to check him out. He's not he's no spring chicken. He's not a chicken at all, of course. But if he were, he would have been born at some earlier date than spring, I assume. Okay. The assailant is in custody, so that's good. And then statement, I guess, from Hamill. Early this morning, an assailant broke into the Pelosi residence in San Francisco and violently assaulted Mr. Pelosi. The assailant is in custody, and the motivation for the attack is under investigation, Hamill said in his statement. No speculation at this point from these quarters about exactly what was going on and whether there was any political motivation. Could be, might not be. You never know. We are reminded, though, it says, while much is unknown about the attack, it is certain to raise new worries about violence targeting political figures and their families. And as I was saying, we are reminded here that over the summer, a man armed with a pistol was arrested near Representative Pramila Jayapal's Seattle home after yelling threats at the Congresswoman, who was at home with her husband at the time. Representative Lee Zeldin, of course, separately attacked by a man at a campaign event in New York during his gubernatorial race. A little small typo there that threw me off a little bit. The T in event is missing. So it was like Lee Zeldin was attacked separately by a man at a campaign, even in New York. Even in New York, this could happen. Well, sure. Okay. Mr. Pelosi was taken to the hospital where he's receiving excellent medical care. I think the medical people wrote this, and is expected to make a full recovery. The speaker was not in San Francisco at the time. The speaker and her family are grateful to the first responders and medical professionals involved and request privacy at this time, he added. And I think here he is, we're back to, what's his name? Hamill. What's Hamill's, or Drew Hamill? He's not, was was Doug Hamill the name of that like 1970s magician guy? Is that his name? I don't know. I keep thinking of him now, and I'm thinking of Hamill, and I see the first name. I got to look that up. Is that right? The Magic Show, right? That was, I mean, the name of his like Broadway performance, right? Was that not him? What's his name? Oh, well, we'll figure out whether I have it right or wrong here. All right. Well, now I'm very curious about that, and we should spend all our time thinking about that rather than anything newsworthy, I think. Oh, this is going to be weighing on me for a while, so no answer just yet, but I think that's right. Anyway, all right, in other news here, let's see. I got to go back into the mailbox here as well as Pocket. No change in what's going on in my mailbox except that Michael Bennett is in there now as well as the regulars. And somebody has to stop James Carville from sending these things with little video GIFs of him embedded and all this. I don't know who thought this was a great idea, but Carville is the last guy I really want to hear from 5 times a day. And certainly without any video of him with his crazy snake head bouncing up. Doug Henning, thank you. All right, that had me confused. It was Doug and Hamill. So what, we have Dorothy Hamill, Doug Henning, and Drew Hamill. Throw them all together, and it's all a very confusing day. Okay, thank you to production staff, unnamed production staff person who lives in this house and isn't going to school. All right, Doug Henning. Is he alive? Still, I mean, he's a young guy at the time. I imagine he's... Well, now I got to look that up, too. Does anybody remember this person, or am I the only one? All right, let's see. All right, where Doug Henning, huh? He's not alive. Oh, that's too bad. Well, it is interesting here when you look him up. You know how it is with Google and you look these things up. Doug Henning is listed as Canadian magician, which is apparently different from an American magician or just a regular magician. And I don't know. I mean, it's not improper to identify him as Canadian. I'm sure he was proudly Canadian, I think. Maybe he sought American citizenship at some point. But at any rate, no, he's no longer alive, huh? Died in 2000. Yeah, looked like a fairly young guy. Died at the age of 52. No magic could save you from that. That was all illusion, of course. But actually, you know what? Now that I see the little blurb here leading to the Wikipedia entry on him, Doug Henning was a Canadian magician, illusionist, escape artist, and politician. And you thought I was wandering. No, he was a politician, and probably all the Canadians... I wonder if the Canadians knew that. They probably did. I don't know. Some of them did. Wow. Now I'm interested in his political career, although, you know, like most of the career section is going to be about magic shows. The Magic Show. Also, of course, a product of his times, way into transcendental meditation. Now, as for his political career, in case you were wondering, in 1992, Henning was the Natural Law Party, and I guess this grows from out of his transcendental meditation interest, the Natural Law Party candidate in the United Kingdom's general election. So here I was being ethnocentric and wondering whether, like many Canadian performers, was he ever interested in U.S. citizenship and moving to the big show and being a Hollywood, New York type American. But he moved to, I guess, to England, of all places. And why not? They speak English. And contested let me read about this. In 1992, Henning was a Natural Law Party candidate in the United Kingdom's general election, contesting the parliamentary constituency of Blackpool South in Lancashire. How do you like that? As a Canadian citizen, I guess he did this as a Canadian. This is really fascinating. Now I've learned something. As a Canadian citizen, Henning qualified as a candidate under British electoral law, which allows candidates from Commonwealth nations. How do you like that? So you don't have to, get official British citizenship. You can just run for office there. They're not scared of that. That's great. Anyway, he finished 4th of 4 candidates So, no alakazam, poof, I'm first or anything like that. Polling 173 votes. So I think that would have been the magic to try to pull first. Poof, 174 votes. That would have been better magic than anything else. He was senior vice president of the Natural Law Party of Canada, helpfully abbreviated for us here as NLPC, and ran as the party's candidate for the former Toronto riding of Rosedale in the 1993 federal election, finishing 6th out of 10 candidates. So he went back to Canada, ran in Canada, where he was from. Well, not originally from there. I guess he was born in Winnipeg, but whatever. And finished 6th out of 10. So there were definitely people who lost to Doug Henning in 1993 in Canada. They weren't fooled in England, though, and didn't go for him. That's a lonely political career. 173 votes. That seems like, well, I don't think he thought he was going to win. He was clearly standing for a position. That's interesting. What happened in Blackpool South in 1992, by the way? Who won? The answer is the Conservative, the Tory Nick Hawkins won that seat. Close in pursuit there. Labour MP. Was he ever an MP? I don't know. British. Yes. Okay. He was. And, in fact, he then later wins in 1997. That was Gordon Marsden. And let's see, also running there, like I said, Liberal Democrats, Robert E. Wynne, who polled 5,673 votes, and Douglas Henning, Natural Law Party, which gets a pink designation here in color coding, 173 votes. So there you have it. That's rather remarkable. Over in the Canadian federal election, the Liberal Party won that seat. Bill Graham, not the evangelical preacher Billy, but Liberal Canadian Party, Bill Graham. Progressive Conservatives came in second. How do you like that? David McDonald, who, I don't know what to tell you about him. Let's see. Reform Party came in third. The New Democratic Party polled fourth, with another guy who's got an entry in Wikipedia, Jack Layton. I guess if you don't have an entry in Wikipedia, you probably didn't do that well. Maybe you didn't challenge for a seat anytime later on. National Party, then the Natural Law Party, who polled fewer votes. He got 817 votes as the Natural Law Party candidate in the Canadian election. The winner with 25,000 votes. Second place had 10,900 votes. Doug Henning, 817 votes for 1.59%. Followed by the Green Party. So the Green Party really got walloped there. Then the Independent, well, I don't know if it's an independent party or just an independent person. You can't tell. So Independent. Next up, by the way, a real thing, the Marxist-Leninist Party candidate Steve Rochinski with 57 votes after the Independent. And then abolitionist Jan Patrice it's French. Patrice de Audebert Garcien with 40 votes. And I don't know what they were abolishing at the time, but it says here, if I hover over it, this is interesting history, everybody. Abolitionist Party of Canada was a Canadian political party founded by perennial candidate John Turmel. The party ran on a platform of monetary reform, including the abolition, there we are, of interest rates and the income tax. Interesting. I'm interested in interest rates. And the use of local employment trading system of banking, and introducing, what else? That's where we trail off here. Introducing a form of social credit with monthly dividends being paid out to each Canadian. I think you could get more interest in that now, but I guess they've moved on and been absorbed by other parties along the way. Okay. They were founded in 1993, dissolved in 1996. So that's the end of the Abolitionist Party. They abolished themselves 3 years later. Oh, that is interesting. And I would abolish myself too. It lists here, their quick, information box, their colors. I guess each party adopts some sort of official color scheme. Light yellow That's not a great color, quite honestly. Butter. Fantastic color for butter, terrible color for, let's say, yard signs. But didn't matter. They abolished those two. And how the hell did we get here? There's important news in here. I'm serious. Somewhere in pocket. Let's go back to that. I can show you my sleeves. There's nothing up my sleeves, but there are things in my pocket. And I should get back to them. All right. So, well, if we have any sort of update on Paul Pelosi, we will try and bring that to you. In the meantime, the stories that I had considered and prepared to discuss with you are awaiting in pocket. So let's go. Where were we yesterday? Oh, yes, right. Yesterday we read a bit of the story. We didn't get to the exciting conclusion, but perhaps we can remind ourselves of the story of the New Mexico county where the Cowboys for Trump guy, Couy Griffin, was based. And he fought his lonely and losing battle to try and, well, this losing battle to stay out of jail, but a winning battle to corrupt the idiot Republicans of Otero County in New Mexico and talk them into election denialism to the point where we're a little bit worried about whether or not they're going to be able to count their votes properly in that county. And, of course, they're now running Audrey Trujillo for Secretary of State statewide in New Mexico. And I guess there's some chance that she might pull off a victory. And then we're going to be, everybody's going to be scratching their heads about whether or not the various counties and indeed the whole state of New Mexico can accurately count its votes in the upcoming federal election. And then, of course, huge question mark for 2024 on that front. I think we left off just reading the story of the activists that showed up to the county meetings in Otero and saying things like, hey, we want all the ballots counted by hand. We don't want any machines counting these ballots. And there being some 65,000 or so votes expected to be cast. 67,000. Oh, I see. 67,000 is the population, the entire population of Otero County. So far fewer votes will actually be cast than that. But even so, reading the ballots and tallying them by hand could take days, if not weeks, given the number of questions being settled on any given ballot and the way they have to be sorted. And I mean, you'd think that it would be, I guess if you don't think about it at all, it sounds like an easy thing to do. Let's count the ballots by hand, even if there are 50,000 of them. You know, you sit down, you do the job, whatever, you get dedicated campaign workers, and it might take them a couple of days. But remember that each ballot will include perhaps a vote for Congress, and there will be a couple of different districts, of course, each with a different different people running for Congress. There may be other offices being decided, perhaps state offices. I don't know. I don't think there's a Senate. I haven't heard much about a Senate race in New Mexico, but that might be because it's either they're not having one or it's well settled who's going to win and they're not emailing me all the time. But there could be a number of different races. There could be a number of different questions, ballot questions, local questions. So, you know, the same ballots would have to be processed several times. It's not, of course, as people, I don't know why this image pops into people's heads. You open up a ballot box and it says one of two candidate names on it, and you just sort them into two piles and count, which would be okay, except, and that might work for certain races. But, yeah, then you have to have like 15 different ballot boxes, and everybody has to be directed to put their ballots in the right one. I mean, it would be a worse disaster, of course. Imagine Americans on Election Day trying to sort out, you know, and what happens who could even tell with the voter suppression and tight rules designed for voter suppression that are out there? I'm sure that the rule would be, well, if you put your vote for Bob Jones, and don't vote for Bob Jones, quite honestly. He's a terrible guy. But if you were voting for Bob Jones for Senate and you put it in the House box, I assume somebody somewhere would insist that that vote not be counted, that you be disqualified, even though everybody knows what you were trying to do and the intent of the voter is very clear. Or if you put, you're voting on a bond initiative and you vote yes for the bond thing. Don't vote yes for bonds. Please, everybody stop. Actually, usually in support of those. But if you vote yes on the bond issue and you stuck that in the House race box, and so you have 18 votes in this box for Bob Jones and 1 yes. What do you do with yes? Which bond question was it? If there's just one, fine. Unless you're voting, how do we know you're not voting for Bob Yes? That guy whose last name is Yes. Could be anything. But even if you sort it out, that too could take days. And this person's point in the meeting here was the local elections official saying hand counting indisputably. It takes more time, costs more money to do as a result, and is less accurate. People just count less accurately than the machines do. I know people don't trust the machines, and it's not inherently crazy to think, well, the problem with the machine is that it can be manipulated, and of course it could give you whatever result you program it to give you, and it would be difficult to know just from looking at it or just from using the machine whether or not you had in fact seen the votes manipulated. If you have a stack of 10,000 ballots and it tells you candidate A won with 12,000, well, I guess if you have 10,000 ballots and they won with 12,000 votes, you would know offhand. But if they won with 8,000 votes and the other person got 2,000 votes, you'd say, well, that's plausible. I mean, I didn't think it was going to be that much of a landslide. But, if it splits it in some reasonable fashion, you might never be tempted to check again. But if it comes out and says it was, like I said, 80-20, even that, although then I would say, really? Are you serious? And I'd look through. But if it came out closer to 50-50, 55-45 for candidate A, would you ever run the ballots again? I mean, maybe the standard procedure is to do it again and then make sure you get the same number. But if you've programmed it to give you the same number, right, you're not going to detect anything. I guess people who run enough elections get to know what the patterns to expect really are. But, if you got a result that was 55-45, I would not be suspicious of that. I wouldn't be calling for a hand count of the ballots. Though, again, if you're of the mind that the machine has simply been programmed and it doesn't matter that the vote is actually 80-20 the other way and only the machines are designed to give us a plausible result and no one believes this, then I guess you're shouting into the wilderness. But at that point, you're talking about like people who say they've been abducted by aliens or whatever. And, how do you entertain every complaint, even though it sounds crazy, but there could be, possibly some truth to it. But what would be the motivation? Well, anyway, these people were, of course, calling for hand counts of all the ballots because they imagine it is very simple. And you just take the paper out and you just count the damn things. But you can see what all the complications would be. And even so, then when they would double check on the results of the election and they would find, well, for the most part, essentially the machines counted everything perfectly accurately. Then we checked again because there were 3 ballots. Remember this story? Ballots that were rejected by the machine. And they didn't know exactly at first, well, what are we going to do? Well, let's examine the ballots and decide what we will do about it. And they looked and they said, all right, so there was an error in marking the ballot, but it seems fairly plain that for 9 out of the 10 questions that had to be decided on this ballot, this person has done just fine in indicating what their intent is. On the 10th question, there's a smudge somewhere that screws everything up. So we won't count their vote on the 10th question on the ballot. But 1 through 9 is perfectly clear. So they added them in. And this conspiracy theorist guy was like, aha, that's a discrepancy. You counted 10,003 votes the second time, but there are only 10,000 votes the first time. Therefore, conspiracy, voter fraud, yargle-bargle, everything has to be counted by hand. That's where, and then he was getting cheers for that. Yeah, because we want the most accurate count, except as they pointed out, the most accurate count tends to be from the machines. Yeah, but we don't trust the machines. So we want the most accurate count that doesn't involve any machines. Well, there's only one kind of count that doesn't involve any machines. It's the hand count, and those are not very accurate. All right, so that's where we left off in this New Mexico story. But there's a Nevada story to add to this once I get through the conclusion of this. I don't know if there's anything earth-shattering in the end of this story, but that's where we stopped. And when using voting machines, of course, this story explains, states build in a series of checks and balances to ensure accuracy. The specifics vary by jurisdiction, but typically include pre-election certification and accuracy testing, post-election statistical and risk-limiting audits, plus optional or automatic recounts in close races. So there are several backstops. Right before the election, they test the equipment, they mark sample ballots, they pretend to run a race and count it, and then they double check it, probably in small batches, perhaps by counting by hand. Certainly running it through again. If you run it through like 5 times and you get the same number every time, you probably got it right. But I guess just to be sure, they then check by hand. And then afterwards, of course, there are random samples that are taken, that are recounted just to make sure that you're not missing anything or any weird anomalies. And then, of course, if any candidates say it's still not right, or there's still reason to believe that something went wrong, they can call for a recount. The machines, of course, do have limitations. The article does note they can't interpret someone changing their vote by crossing out a box or writing in the margins, but they can tally in hours what it would take humans days or weeks to count when it's just filling in a bubble somewhere. All right, so that's where we were, and then we had the conclusion of the story from Otero County, and then another alarming story from Nevada, and just the number of states in which these problems, these protests are cropping up, and portending doom is rather alarming. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Finally, the exciting conclusion to the story in Otero County, New Mexico, where the August 11th meeting would prove to be the high water mark of their rebellion. Couy Griffin, you may remember him, would end up being removed from office. You remember that court case resulting in his being removed from office for being involved in the insurrection. The first elected official anywhere in the country, I believe, to be removed from office under that clause. He attended the January 6th riots, of course, at the Capitol, and was later convicted of breaching restricted Capitol grounds. In September, he became the first elected official in over 150 years to be disqualified from office under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which bars anyone involved in an insurrection against the United States from serving in public office. I believe we have more house cleaning to do in that respect. Holmes has ignored the commission's directives. Holmes, the local elections official, just again saying the commission doesn't have the authority to order the things they think they're ordering, that they're purporting to order, and so they have been following state law instead. Early voting has, as a result, already started for this fall's elections. They wanted to get rid of that too. With voting machines and secure ballot drop boxes currently set to be part of the system, despite the commission purportedly banning those items. So far, no lawsuit has been filed by R.B. Nichols, the county attorney who publicly declared that he would not file a lawsuit that he knew to be in bad faith. So that's pretty good news, too. The most recent polling shows incumbent Secretary of State Toulouse Oliver with a healthy lead over challenger Trujillo. That, too. Whew, sigh of relief. Hope it works out. Although, I wonder if you can expect to see the pro-Trujillo forces come and try and stuff the ballot boxes somehow, either to just cheat and win outright, or if they get caught, they'll say, see, there's ballot stuffing going on. We were right. I mean, they are actually that dumb, and people have been caught doing that already. So it wouldn't surprise me terribly to see it happen again. So since Griffin was removed as a commissioner, the drop box and voting machine issues he was crusading for have not made it back into discussion. How odd. Instead, commission meetings have returned to focusing on typical local governance issues. What a great thing. But election conspiracies have not died down. In rural Torrance County commissioners approved a hand recount of primary election results and recently tried to oust the county clerk over her handling of voting machine certification. Lopez Askin, the Doña Ana County clerk, is one of the most vocal clerks in the state in responding to election conspiracy theories, which she finds are regularly brought up at community meetings. She recalled one resident at a meeting shaking with anger and demanding officials look into fraud as she held up the Clemence's self-described audit. Remember, those are the local activists saying that if you found the discrepancy saying that 3 ballots, which couldn't earlier be processed, are now being counted, that was obvious evidence of voter fraud. This is the example that these people are following and coming to these meetings shaking with anger. Lopez Askin said that she and her colleagues try to explain the multiple levels of security built into the system, certification of machines, accuracy tests, recounts in close races, post-election audits of results, but ultimately she fears people will opt out of the democratic process because they believe the people telling them it's a sham. These folks get up there and they are fully angry and emotional. They believe it. I don't know if there's anything else I could say at this point that could continue otherwise, or that could continue otherwise. That's what it says. So I actually feel mostly compassion for them. All right. Remember, we were reading this piece in Bolt's magazine, Paul McLeod being the author of the piece. Interesting, definitely disturbing warnings for things to come. And, you sometimes wonder on a small scale, if you really only have 1 or 2 people coming up and shaking with anger, you wonder, could you, but sometimes they're too far gone. Could you bring them to, the pre-election accuracy check and say, look, let me just show you what we do. Here you can see we've marked 100 ballots. They're not, with these conspiracy nuts, what do, right? You say, we didn't run a race. We're not using the real ballots because we don't want there to be any confusion, right? So we're using sample ballots that we printed up just for this purpose, and it has a fictional Jones versus a fictional Smith, because we're not inclusive and we don't bring other non-Anglo-Saxon names into this. And we mark them more or less at random. And, we just hand them out to the employees, and then we count them up to make sure we got all 100 back. And then we run them through the machine, and then we hand count them to look and see, is this machine counting accurately? That's how you would do it, right? If you were the county commissioner. Of course, they would say, I wouldn't use the machines. Well, all right. But if you had 100, let's time you. You count it, count the ballots, and tell me for 100 ballots what the tally was that you got. Well, I get 55-45. But how long did it take you? Okay, it took you 10 minutes to count all 100 ballots. I don't know. Probably not that long. But okay, let's say that that's the case. But we know that there are 10,000 ballots to be counted, and you've only counted 100 of them. This should take you then you can do the math. This is how long it would take you alone to count all those ballots. Now let's see how you did, by the way. Because as it turns out, you said that the results was 55-45, but when we machine counted them and we had Joe over here hand count them, we got 56-44. So you see there's already an error here. somebody's wrong. Could be you, could be Joe, could be the machine. We'll run it again and check it and find out. But here's the thing. If the second time you count it and you get 56-44, congratulations. But the question from your, the question you were posing before is, aren't you guilty of some sort of fraud for having gotten 55-45? Shouldn't you be going to jail now, or maybe even being hanged as a traitor? No, you just, you made a mistake, and then the system of double checking caught the mistake, and everything's fine. And besides which, it wouldn't have changed the outcome, but we got it right. So what's the problem? It's you guys running around saying you're going to hang everybody for getting a different count one time in a system that contemplates 3 counts at minimum. So, but would that explain anything to them? Probably not, because then they would say, okay, fine, sure. The machine works just fine in the fictional Jones versus Smith election, but that's not the election we're having. And there's going to be thousands of ballots. And I don't know, maybe you program this machine to put out the correct results for the fictional Jones-Smith election, but it's pre-programmed to choose Biden instead of Trump, or something like that. And, when all you can do is just say, well, it's not. I don't believe you. And I also think you're a vampire pedophile and drinking the blood of children to stay alive forever. Well, I don't know what to tell you about that one. And at that point, I guess you stop having the conversation. And if you just flood the zone with people like that, and you respond to every one of them because you feel empathy for their being confused and angry, then you don't have any time to actually administer the election, and that screws things up even worse. You see how this can multiply and build on itself and become a problem. All right, let's see. I mentioned that there was another similar story that should be read into the record here. Here we are. Associated Press story. Why did I can't recall the provenance of how this one landed in my inbox, but AP reporting Gabe Stern, the reporter, filing this yesterday. Nevada officials begin unprecedented, ready for this one, hand count of ballots. Oh dear. What's going on here? The story is illustrated by a photo of a group of people here in this image from video, Nye County Clerk Mark Kampf, at far left in the suit, swears in a group of residents who will hand count early ballots cast in the rural county about halfway between Las Vegas and Reno on Wednesday, October 26th, 2022. All right, ready for this town name? I don't know how you pronounce this. Pahrump? P-A-H-R-U-M-P. Pahrump? Pahrumpa-pum-pum? I don't know. This is a new one on me. Pahrump. Like harumph, but not. Nye is the largest county in the United States to attempt a hand count of all its ballots in the midterm elections, a charge fueled by, you'll never guess, conspiracy theories about voting machines. So, okay, what if you get a whole bunch of volunteers? All right, you can probably count your ballots on time, but one thing to look out for is, are your volunteers idiots? Or are they regular people who just want to do the right thing? Or are they a little bit of both? Or are they conspiracy theorists? Or are they cheaters? We don't know. They're all swearing on something. They're not actually... I noticed, by the way, they're not touching Bibles. Dramatic music time. They're not swearing on Bibles, so how do we know that they're swearing properly, et cetera, et cetera? But here you are. By the way, the group of random individuals are dressed, as you might expect, a group of random individuals. Although, the county clerk dressed up and put on a suit to swear them in. None of these guys put on suits. There's a lady in a nice tie-dye shirt. Maybe she's cool. There's a lady right next to her, though, wearing a Black Rifle Coffee Company t-shirt, which is, of course, one of the corporate sponsors who signed an endorsement deal with Kyle Rittenhouse after he murdered 2 people at the Kenosha counter protests way back when. So, maybe she's not too cool, or maybe she swears not to really count the votes correctly. We'll never know until we find out that she's been convicted of fraud later on. So here's the story from Pahrump, I guess. Pahrump, Nevada. Volunteers in rural Nevada County, where voting machine conspiracy theories led to an unprecedented hand count of mail-in ballots, came face to face with one messy reality of their plan Wednesday. It's more time-consuming than anticipated. Womp womp. Too bad for you. And by the way, they shouldn't feed them during this thing, I think. After a full day in the Nye County office building in Pahrump, 60 miles west of Las Vegas, some 60 volunteers, that's a lot, had counted about 900 of the 1,950 mail-in ballots that the county has received so far. So it took them all day to count 900 ballots and get it right. Because again, each one of these ballots probably has multiple questions, has to be processed multiple times, and has to be done very carefully so that you don't accidentally recount already counted ballots. And I don't know what the process is. I don't know what they've laid out for themselves. Maybe there's more detail in the article, but I guess if you've got a Senate race first, right, you say, okay, everybody count the Senate race and only the Senate race. What are the results? And you can compare. I counted this many. You count this pile now too, but don't mix the piles. You got the same number I did. Good. Okay, that's fine. Let's send it on. If we got different numbers, we got to do it again. All right, now we do the whole thing over again just for the House of Representatives race from this area. And please, we hope that the county isn't split into two different districts. If it's nice and easy, the whole county is in one district. If it's not, well, all the ballots from the 3rd district over here and all the ballots from the 2nd district over here, now count them, now compare, et cetera, et cetera. Now the question of county sheriff, now county clerk, now secretary of state, now all the things over and over again. So a full day to count 900 of more than twice that number, 1,950 ballots that have come in so far. Now, of course, comes election day and you have 15,000 of these things. How long is it going to take you to do your work? You get the picture, conspiracy guy. It was the first day that counting could start under a state Supreme Court ruling that said officials must prevent the public release of early results. The court also blocked a plan to live stream the vote counting. That's, of course, we'll totally verify it by using the internet because everything on the internet is correct and true. But you get the idea. The court blocked the plan to live stream the vote counting, saying video could be released only after polls close on November 8th, right? You don't want any inadvertent disclosure of results. And like, well, we won't. Well, what if somebody blurts it out, right? And it gets streamed out there. There's 100 votes for Jones and 80 votes for Smith. And that's not who's running there. And then it live streams out. Oh my God. I don't know what you would decide based on those results, but the point is you don't want that leaking out. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union of Nevada, unsuccessfully sought to block the counting on the grounds that it could allow election results to be made public before many voters had even weighed in. The ACLU was preparing to ask the state high court to intervene again. Spokesperson West Jewell, J-U-H-L, Jewell, said on Wednesday night, the ACLU contends the county failed to comply with Friday's order. Okay, I don't see what the huge problem is, and you might think it's not a particularly good look that the ACLU is fighting against early counting of the ballots. I guess that's their idea of it is, well, we just don't want anything that could risk an inadvertent leak of any results. But I don't know. I think they could probably manage that. You got to have some volunteers. Some people have to be trusted with these ballots at some level, at some point. And counting early makes it at least possible to get your results sooner after the close of the polls on election day or maybe even on election night than if you only begin counting the mail-in ballots and things you're going to have to process differently on the at the end of the polling on election day, and that leads to conspiracy theorists supposing that there's fraud there, because how come it could possibly take more than a couple of hours to count all the votes? Well, it takes 900 or all day to count 900 of the things. Now you can see how this would take a long time. But that would be too logical, and you can't trust conspiracy theorists to say, well, I've learned from personal experience how long it takes to actually count ballots, therefore I will give other people leeway. No one gets leeway, just me, because everybody there is a gimme-tarian. All right. But at any rate, the ACLU was preparing to ask the state high court to intervene again, right? The ACLU contends the county failed to comply with Friday's order. In what sense? I'm not sure. Let's see if this clears it up. It's an embarrassing day for our democracy. That's true. A historic disaster is brewing in Nye County. ACLU Nevada Executive Director, what's his name? Athar? A-T-H-A-R? Atar, maybe? I don't know. Hasebullah. Atar Hasebullah. My best guess. I apologize there. Anyway, the executive director says in the statement, after watching the first several hours of ballot counting, I guess the embarrassment is that it takes that long to count by hand. And really, honestly, we all knew it would take that long. But just to humor the conspiracy theory people, we're forcing ourselves to do that. Jewel, remember who that is? West Jewel, the spokesperson for the ACLU, said an armed volunteer removed an ACLU observer from one room and attempted to take her notes. I wonder why. I'd love to hear the statement from the armed volunteer. And what are we talking about, armed volunteer, exactly? I don't know. That is kind of worrying and an embarrassing day for our democracy as well. Nye County, an old silver mining region between Las Vegas and Reno, is home to about 50,000 residents, including 33,000 registered voters. It's best known as the home of the nation's former nuclear weapons test site. So good, healthy people with strong mental capabilities. I'm sure there's no ill effects around there. I don't know. So 33,000 registered voters. So let's say they got 50% turnout or less and had 15,000 ballots to count. And they're going to count them, and they're counting them at the rate of 900 a day. If they manage to step up to processing 1,000 a day, small increase from where they were from day one, 15 days to count all the ballots. So you tell me how that's going to go. Nevada has one of the most closely watched U.S. Senate races in the country, as well as high-stakes contests for governor and the office that oversees elections. So you can see how many times they're going to have to count each one of these ballots. 2 groups of 5 that the Associated Press observed Wednesday spent about 3 hours each counting 50 ballots. See how slowly this is going? 2 groups of 5 people, just to, make sure that everybody's getting the same number. So 2 different groups, 5 people, 50 ballots. 3 hours to get those done. Mismatched tallies led to recounts and occasionally more recounts. Several noted how arduous the process was, with one volunteer lamenting, "I can't believe it's 2 hours to get through 25 ballots." Yes. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? You'd think this was this pretty simple thing. Oh, the numbers are the numbers. How can we have these problems? I don't know. But I'm looking at 2 groups of 5 people who live on a former nuclear test site struggling with 25 ballots at a time. 2 hours later, you guys have not gotten the count right on 25 ballots. There's going to be 50,000 of them. You wanted to hand count. You were the one that thought this would be a genius idea and you'd get the real results beautifully. And by the way, all done on election night and none of this fraud stuff. You asked for it, you got it, and it will change 0 minds. 0 minds. They're going to wonder what mind control poison was used to make them such slow counters. And clearly QAnon is going to have a theory about this at some point. Nye County Interim Clerk Mark Kempf emphasized throughout the day to take it nice and slow, trying to get of course, they'll say, that's it. That's the fraud. He's slowing us down. He told us to take it slow. It was just an idea that maybe you would count more accurately if you didn't try to rush. In an interview, he declared the first day a success, which is amazing, and said it was a process of learning here. He sounds like a patient guy. As one person announced candidate names aloud, and that's one of the problems with live streaming the thing, a verifier looked over her shoulder and 3 talliers marked sheets of paper. A printout instruction sheet on a wall across from a video camera above their table urged them to focus on each name that was read. You see how difficult this is going to be. These guys are focusing. Some of them are there in Black Rifle Coffee Company shirts. I don't know if they can focus. One group observed by AP found during their first 30 minutes that they had mismatched numbers for 8 candidates. A recount took nearly 40 minutes, and 2 of the recounts still had different outcomes. This is really going to be something. That's going to be my new name, Mismatch, said one of the talliers. You know, if we could get those people to go out and evangelize for the idiocy of this hand count movement, it might be helpful. But, you know, they're going to go out there and say, we'll do better next time. It's our first day. Don't feel bad, the verifier replied. As long as we catch 'em, there is that, it will get better, Kampf later told the group. The Secretary of State's office said Nye County had to split teams into separate rooms so anyone observing the count of early in-person and mailed ballots would not know the, quote, totality of returns. Participants were not identified for the media. So that's an interesting fail-safe as well, right? We don't want the results to leak out, so no one will get, I guess no one but, I don't even know whether the actual elected officials will get those results early. But if everybody's in different rooms, then all you can say is, well, where I was in our batch of 50 ballots, it looked like Jones was winning, but I don't know what was going on in the rest of the rooms. Okay. In a letter sent Tuesday to Nevada Secretary of State election officials, though, the ACLU warned that the reading of candidate names aloud within earshot of public observers constituted, quote, a release of election results in violation of Nevada law. I mean, partial results, but you know these lawyers are going to nitpick on everything. And it's worth testing, I guess. Nye County spokesman Arnold Knightley said officials could not respond to questions about the letter because the case was before the state Supreme Court. Jennifer Russell, spokeswoman for the Republican Secretary of State, Barbara, Segovsky, I'm guessing at this pronunciation, also did not have a response to the ACLU letter, so it doesn't matter. But they just wanted me to struggle with the name, I guess. Observers were required to sign a form saying they won't release results they overhear. Anyone who does could be charged with a gross misdemeanor. It's the grossest they've got. The AP was not allowed to photograph the proceedings. They just got the swearing in. The concern over safeguarding the tallies is because the process is so unusual. Ballots cast early, either in person or by mail, are typically counted by machine on Election Day. Boo! With results released only after the polls close. In most places, hand counts are used after an election on a limited basis to ensure machine tallies are accurate. Nye County commissioners voted to run a hand count of all its ballots after being bombarded with complaints by residents who have been subjected to nearly 2 years of conspiracy theories related to voting machines and false claims that the 2020 presidential election was stolen from former President Donald Trump. Trump won 69% of the vote. That's nice for him. In Nye County, even as President Joe Biden won Nevada by about 33,500 votes. Or about how many they expect to get in Nye County, as it turns out. Nye County wanted to start counting its early ballots before Election Day rather than risk missing the state's November 17th certification deadline. And remember, the election is October 8th, and they were afraid they weren't going to be able to certify by November 17th. If they had to start counting on November 8th in the evening, they weren't going to make it, which is a realistic worry. Nye is the most prominent county in the U.S. to change its vote counting process in reaction to the conspiracy theories, even though there has been no evidence of widespread fraud or manipulation of machines in the 2020 election, including in Nevada. The decision prompted the longtime county clerk to resign. I don't want to deal with this. Kempf has described the county's Dominion tabulator machines as a stopgap measure while it decides how to handle tallies for future elections. But the machines will remain the primary recording mechanism for this election, despite the hand counting. If it's successful, and we can show that we can be effective and we learn by it, we can go to a full hand count process, Kempf told reporters. That's weird to go backwards. I mean, if it's successful and it shows that after enough practice, you can get a hand count that's matched by a machine count, which means the machines are accurate, that's an interesting decision to then say, okay, the machines are accurate, we're going to stop using them. I mean, and of course, the other way of expressing it is the hand count is also accurate. We're going to continue to use that. It's just more expensive and more difficult and more time consuming. Very odd. Anyway, the Republicans' nominee for Secretary of State, Jim Marchant, said he wants to spread hand counting to every county. In March, he said he would try to have the state's 15 rural counties adopt hand counting, then force Clark and Washoe counties, homes to Las Vegas and Reno, to do the same. Marchant has repeated unsubstantiated election claims and told audiences that elections are corrupt. But you should trust him if he gets elected. Nevada's least populous county, not least popular necessarily, but least populous, is Esmeralda County. Used hand counting to certify its primary results in June, when officials spent more than 7 hours counting 317 ballots. Now there, I guess I can understand doing hand counting, really just to avoid the expense of having a machine. But I mean, I'd love to see these people who did this work tell people, it took us 7 hours to get through their ballots, and there's only 317 of them. The most populous county in the continental U.S. to rely exclusively on hand counting is, Owyhee County. It's Owyhee County in Idaho. Maybe Joan can tell me how that's pronounced. Maybe she doesn't even know. Which has 1/5 of the registered voters of Nye County. That sounds like a pretty tall order for the rest of the country to have to comply with. It's really kind of crazy. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, how do we do on the pronunciation of the county in Idaho? Did I get this right? Although I looked up for the pronunciation, although it's discussing it in terms of the river, which is a tributary river in Oregon, but I imagine is the source of the name here for the county in Idaho as well. Let's turn up the volume on the laptop and hit the pronunciation, the little speaker button. Owyhee. So not too bad, right? I think that's actually kind of what I came up with. Owyhee, a little bit like Hawaii, but it's not. Owyhee County. All right. Well, who the hell were they again? It was the least populous county and that was in Nevada, Esmeralda. Right. And then, they are the most populous county in the continental U.S., not like those in the islands, to rely exclusively on hand counting. Owyhee County, Idaho. 1/5 the registered voters of Nye County. And if I recall correctly, they said there was 33,000 registered voters in Nye County. So what does that make? 33,000 divided by 5, 6,600. So the largest county, the most populous county, I guess, in the continental U.S. to rely exclusively on hand counting has only 6,600 registered voters in it, thereabouts. And Nye County, which has 33,000, is going to try it, and it took them 2 hours to do 25 ballots. So, all right. At that rate, I mean, they'll get better with practice, but it's, if you were just doing it straight as math, right, and then calculating like no breaks and no food and no sleeping, 25 ballots every 2 hours. I mean, if you have 33,000 registered voters and you got 25,000 ballots, it's 1,000 times, so 2,000 hours to count those ballots. But I mean, that's only, you got different groups working. I don't know. The math becomes a little crazy. And of course, you're not going to do it nonstop and with no food breaks. Although really, that's the way to get them to stop doing it, is say, I'm sorry, food and sleep are fraud. Now, let's get down to the hand counting of the ballots. That'd be really interesting too, right? Try that one at the meeting. No. There can be no eating, no drinking, no sleeping, and no rotating of workers either. It has to be the same people. Anything else is fraud. And they would say, that's crazy. Where did you come up with that idea? And I'd say, I don't know. You think we drink baby blood and our vampire pedophiles are running the country. So, but that's serious. And me, I just want ballot security and integrity. That's all. Why can't you people, I don't know if they'd see the irony in it. Probably not. Anyway, I would check out that lady in the Black Rifle Coffee Company t-shirt and see whether how her counting is going and whether you can trust her or not. This is going to be happening like all over the place, and it's really kind of crazy, and we should be worried about that. Now, didn't I just mention in reading about Nevada that the MAGA weirdo running for, is it Secretary of State in Nevada, Jim Marchant, wants to spread hand counting to every county, which in Nevada is perhaps not, on its face completely crazy for several of the smaller counties there. What did we say? The smallest one being Esmeralda, which used hand counting and only had 317 ballots to deal with. But he's going to say, based on our success with the 317 ballots of Esmeralda County, we can now force Clark County, by far the most populous county and home to Las Vegas, to hand count everything too. Well, it doesn't really work that way. So what kind of a person is Jim Marchant? Well, I have a story about Jim Marchant for you. I noticed yesterday that was yesterday or the day before? As it turns out, all our stories were either Florida focused or where else were we looking? I can't remember. Michigan is all Florida on Michigan stories. So now today, I guess it can be focused mostly on Nevada and New Mexico. So we've shifted, and plus, of course, Canada and the UK, thanks to Doug Henning. Anyway, here's a story from Mother Jones about Jim Marchant and who he is and what he's all about. Let's take a look and see if we can read it without resorting to the pocket version. Noah Lannard, L-A-N-A-R-D, reports for Mother Jones, MAGA candidate Jim Marchant says he was a highly successful CEO. His divorce records say otherwise. He got divorced from his company, apparently. And guess what? Now, he says, by the way, I'm going to be able to administer all these elections and all of this complex procedure and accounting and mathematics because of what a great and successful CEO I was. I would not want Jim to be secretary of a preschool, says a former employee of the Nevada Secretary of State contender. Let's find out why that is and why anybody thinks that preschools secretaries are that important. I don't know. That's an odd thing to say. Is it that you don't want them around children, or do you think that being secretary of a preschool is easy and he would have effed that up anyway? I don't really know that's an odd quote. Well, anyway, let's see if Noah comes up with better ones. Jim Marchant, the far-right Republican candidate for Nevada Secretary of State, sells himself as a skilled entrepreneur. I'm a business guy. Marchant has said in his pitch to voters, I had 3 very successful technology businesses, and that already raises my eyebrow. First of all, anybody saying, I'm a business guy. We need more business guys in, whether it be the White House or the Secretary of State job in Nevada. It's not automatically disqualifying, but for me, I worry. And then you say, I'm such a great business guy. I've had 3 businesses. And I know that, like the good outcome is I start a business and it becomes successful. I sell the business. I make lots of money. I start a new business. I do the same again. And now I'm on my 3rd business. I'm so successful that I keep starting businesses that other people want to buy from me because of how good the businesses I build are. Now, the other explanation is I'm so terrible at business that I've gone bankrupt or, my company has dissolved twice And third time's a charm, though. I'm going to be a successful business guy. But he says he's had 3 very successful technology businesses, but previously unreported divorce records obtained from a Florida county courthouse, because he's so thoroughly Nevadan, along with interviews of former employees, lawsuits brought against him, against his most prominent company, foreclosure proceedings, and a recent campaign financial disclosure reveal that his career ended in financial ruin, which sounds like something other than what I would describe as successful technology business. Financial ruin is more or less the polar opposite of success in business. In a financial affidavit submitted during his 2010 divorce from his second wife, so he's on his third business and third wife, I guess, Marchant listed no retirement savings despite having been, quote, semi-retired for several years. Maybe he just used them all. Anyway, he also owed $63,106 in credit card debt, had another $30,931 of credit card debt in collections, and was paying off an additional $39,519 on a new Ford pickup. So he has a note on the car. That's not a big deal. But he put the fair market value of his business, an ice vending machine company, at $0, which is not great for a business, and also not a technology company per se. I mean, there's technology involved in ice vending machines, to be sure, but like if somebody says, I'm a very successful CEO, I've had 3 very successful technology businesses. What technology? Ice vending machines. I'd say you're in the ice business and the technology is merely incidental to the sale of the ice. But, you do you, but I noticed that when you do you say that your business is worth $0. So not sure what to take away from that. Let's see. Nevertheless, Marchant, 66 years old, by the way, semi-retired from his ice vending machine business, has claimed that his, quote, background in the technology business, unquote, the technology business, makes him uniquely qualified for the job of Secretary of State. And I will say, it would make you a popular guy selling ice in Nevada, I think, but I don't know. While his first 2 businesses appear to have achieved moderate success, and that's great, his third and most ambitious venture quickly folded and faced millions of dollars in court judgments. As one of its former employees, who asked to remain anonymous, told me about his old boss, I would not want Jim to be secretary of a preschool. I don't think Jim would want himself to be secretary of a preschool either, by the way. Marchant did not respond to multiple messages sent via phone and email to request an interview and responses to detailed questions about his business record. Are they going to tell me what the earlier successful businesses were? I'm curious. Marchant's brief political career has also been a story of defeat recast as triumph. Okay. In 2020, he lost a race for Congress by more than 16,000 votes before insisting the race had been rigged against him and Donald Trump as well. He then checked himself into the Venetian Hotel and Casino to work with Trump supporters trying to overturn the results of both contests. Okay. While there, he received a surprise visit from Wayne Willott, a fringe QAnon influencer with whose work Marchant was apparently acquainted. Against obvious evidence to the contrary, some QAnon followers believe Willott, who uses the alias Juan O. Savin, is also the late John F. Kennedy Jr. in disguise. Okay. I mean, that's a parenthetical comment for you. Wow. So Wayne Willott, who also uses the alias Juan Savin, would like you to also believe that he's got another alias and that Wayne Willott is the alias because he's really John F. Kennedy Jr., who died many years ago and was supposed to show up in Dallas not that long ago and didn't, and neither did this guy, I guess, as far as I know. So that's the level of person we're dealing with here. And Jim Marchant says, let's check into a hotel together and work on overturning the results of the last election. During a speech last year at the For God and Country Patriot Double Down, that was the title of the conference he was speaking at, For God and Country Patriot Double Down, yeehaw, a conference organized by the QAnon group Patriot Voice, they're like little subsects of QAnon people, Marchant recounted how Willett told him to run for Secretary of State instead of trying to get into Congress in 2022. By the way, cute use of the word recounted there. That way, Willett reportedly explained Marchant would be in charge of the state's elections. Willett also pushed Marchant to form a network of like-minded Secretary of State candidates to take control of elections across the country. Now, members of Marchant's and Savin's America First Secretary of State Coalition, another group they formed, might actually succeed. Earlier this year, Marchant won his Nevada GOP primary by 17 points, despite being heavily outspent. In Michigan, Christina Caramo, remember her? We've mentioned that name before, who believes the election was stolen and claims pop stars like Ariana Grande are putting kids, quote, under a satanic delusion, unquote, is the Republicans' pick for Secretary of State. In Arizona, it's Mark Fincham, the, quote, poster child for election deniers, who was photographed outside the Capitol on January 6th. In Pennsylvania, GOP election denialist Doug Mastriano, who organized buses to Washington, D.C. that day, January 6th, will select the Secretary of State if he wins his race for governor. Swing state elections that hold dozens of electoral college votes in the balance could soon be overseen by right-wing conspiracy theorists. Marchant may have the best odds of winning any of them, but his record has received only minimal scrutiny. Well, I guess that's what we're here for now, to read this Mother Jones scrutiny of it. Marchant's father, James Cotton Marchant Sr. Now, Cotton, I don't know whether that's his middle name or not, but it's enclosed in scare quotes here, so I guess a nickname more than anything else, but I don't know. You never know. James Cotton Marchant Jr. was a Gainesville businessman who owned mini-marts in Florida. All right, so I guess family's originally from Florida. After graduating from Troy University in Alabama in 1978, Marchant started working in one of Cotton's stores as a clerk before rising through the ranks of the family business. In 1984, he started a software company that his campaign bio says served customers nationwide, according to a copy of his resume, and that's enclosed in quotes, which honestly, like, that's a pretty mild claim, right? So now I'm super suspicious that his company, or his campaign bio says his software company, which should be serving customers nationwide, serves quote unquote customers nationwide. Now I see we must be getting to something. According to a copy of his resume from 2000, Marchant Business Systems mostly provided accounting systems to customers, quote, scattered primarily throughout Florida, along with meeting the computer needs of a payday lender in the state. So really, even so, okay, moderately successful. If you're serving customers statewide in Florida, Florida's a big state. That's great. Maybe he had a customer or two outside of Florida, and therefore, throughout the state doesn't really quite capture his real reach, but okay. As well as a few out of it becomes difficult to phrase it correctly. So then you just say nationwide. Well, if it was also Alabama near the panhandle of Florida, that might not be the best description, but it might be no crime to say so. In 1995, Marchant launched Mercury Communications, one of Florida's early internet service providers. So he did want to get into tech, right? Software and ISP. In what Marchant claims as a career highlight, he asked Florida's Department of Revenue if he was required to charge his new customers sales tax. Okay. The department ruled that he was. That led to a backlash from Marchant and others in the nascent internet industry, and the tax never wound up being implemented. So he fought some taxes in Florida. During that same period, Marchant helped start the Florida Internet Service Providers Association and became the trade group's president in 1997. Joe Marion, who served as the group's executive director during that period, said via email that he considers Marchant a hard worker who is being, quote, honest, when he talks about building one of the country's first internet providers and successfully lobbying against taxing internet access in Florida. Marion, though, hasn't been in touch with Marchant in 20 years. In 1998, Marchant sold Mercury, which had about 4,500 subscribers, for what his resume described as, quote, an extremely attractive price, unquote. Marchant has said that he then raised roughly $17 million for Maxess, his third and final technology venture. The initial goal was to quickly offer access to high-speed internet and internet phone service in Florida before expanding throughout the Southeast. Instead, the company struggled to develop a functioning product and soon burned through its startup capital, $17 million. In May of 2001, less than 3 years after Marchant started the company, Maxess stopped doing business and fired all its employees, according to a federal court filing. The former employee said Marchant drove it into the ground. A second former employee, who also asked for anonymity, told me that new hires were encouraged to invest their own savings in the company, and that some put in significant amounts. This person remembers workers being encouraged to work for free after Maxess was unable to make payroll, and some did that for months. In 2001, Maxess was sued for breach of contract in a case that led to a more than $4.3 million judgment in Orange County, Florida. 3 more Orange County lawsuits led to more than $1.7 million in judgments between 2002 and 2004. In total, Maxess was sued 9 times in the county. 9 times. All right? In neighboring Seminole County, a 10th case led to a $29,465 judgment. This does seem like rather small potatoes, but interesting to know, I guess. In federal court, what was then MCI WorldCom, they were super honest, right, sued Maxess for defaulting on its contractual obligations. In a 2003 court filing signed by Marchant, both parties agreed that MCI had a legal right to foreclose on Maxess property so that it could satisfy the $1 million judgment Marchant had accepted. Later that year, Marchant and his second wife informally split up. In response to an August article from the Las Vegas Review-Journal about Marchant's business history, campaign spokesperson Rory McShane said thousands of companies went out of business when the dot-com bubble burst. Like any lifetime businessman, Jim Marchant has had his share of successes and his share of failures, McShane said, and along the way, we never give up and never stopped creating jobs in Nevada and across the country. It's unlikely that Marchant has created many jobs in Nevada. One of the selling points for his ice vending machines is that owning them doesn't require having any employees. Marchant has claimed that he went into early retirement for a few years following Maxess's collapse after learning that a cousin had invested in an ice and water vending machine company. Marchant moved to Nevada in 2005 to get into the industry. Although there is little record of what he did for work after first arriving in the state, he did maintain an active online presence. In 2009, on The Diesel Stop, a forum for Ford truck owners, can't wait to get into that one, Marchant wrote that he was looking to buy an F-350. Now more than ever, do I want to support Ford? Now more than ever, do I want? It's not a question, he's saying that he does. Marchant explained, they have not taken any Obama money and have so far avoided being taken over by our Marxist government. 3 months later, Marchant stopped paying the mortgage on his Nevada home, according to a Clark County, Nevada court filing, because mortgages are, of course, Marxist. The next year, Marchant's second wife officially filed for divorce. According to divorce filings, his liquid assets were limited to the $7,381 he had in the bank, but he had gone ahead and bought a new pickup. He held more than $1.1 million in debt, and his net income was $2,150 per month. His now ex-wife, a licensed practical nurse, was in significantly better financial shape. In 2011, after the divorce became final, Marchant turned over the deed of his Nevada home to avoid foreclosure. The same year, a different bank filed a complaint stating that he was no longer paying the mortgage on his Florida home. A court issued a foreclosure judgment. The ice company Marchant listed during his divorce, Desert Ice, that would make you rather popular, had a strangely rudimentary website. Archived versions of the now defunct page listed a phone number Marchant has used on Nevada voter registration forms, according to public records, and not much else. Clicking the YouTube button led to a 45-second video with a Nathan Fielder-esque soundtrack. And I don't even know what that is supposed to mean, but those of you who are Nathan Fielder fans, I guess, will know immediately. More recently, Marchant has described the company, which appears to have at least 3 locations in Las Vegas, as a little small business here. Okay, that seems accurate. In 2015, the Las Vegas Review-Journal reported that the owner of a Las Vegas water and ice vending business wanted to challenge the Republican Assembly Speaker in a recall election. Marchant's recall effort went nowhere. The next year, he did manage to defeat a Republican assemblyman and spent a relatively unremarkable 2 years as a state legislator before losing his seat in the 2018 blue wave. I reached out to my opponent, Shay Backus, and congratulated her on winning the election. Marchant wrote on Facebook about a race decided by 135 votes. He clearly didn't doubt the state's ability to count votes. Instead of trying to win back the seat, Marchant ran for Congress. In 2020, Marchant submitted a campaign financial disclosure that put the value of his 50% share of Desert Ice between $500,000 and $1 million. It was a major shift from 2010 when Marchant stated under oath that the company was worth nothing. Despite the valuation, Marchant said he'd received no income from the company in 2019 and 2020. According to a recent Nevada financial disclosure, Marchant has added one revenue stream since his last campaign: Social Security. Okay. After losing his House race by 5 points, Marchant filed a lawsuit to force the Democratic stronghold of Clark County, home to Las Vegas, to hold a new election. He did not seek to have the Republican-leaning counties in the district vote again. A judge quickly threw out the suit. In December of 2020, Marchant appeared alongside 6 fake electors who signed a document stating that Trump had won Nevada. A few months later, he announced his candidacy for Secretary of State. He later told Margaret White, a Nevada mortgage banker who posts monologues and interviews with fringe figures on her personal website, that George Soros and, quote, his cabal had hatched a plan to rig Nevada elections back in 2004. He was 100% convinced that Nevada is a red state and that conservatives would win it in a fair election. For Marchant, Democrats winning elections in the state is evidence itself of fraud. Or itself evidence, I should have said. At a Trump rally earlier this month, Marchant said that the former president would return to the White House if he and fellow Republican Secretary of State candidates win in November. When I'm Secretary of State of Nevada, we're going to fix it, he declared as Trump stood behind him. And when my coalition of Secretary of State candidates around the country gets elected, we're going to fix this whole country. And President Trump is going to be president again in 2024. The first step for Marchant is, of course, prevailing in a state where a Republican presidential candidate hasn't won since 2004. A recent campaign flyer presents his experience in the private sector as his main qualification for being able to run Nevada's elections. As Secretary of State, it argues Jim will use his experience as CEO of 3 successful technology companies. Not so much. Former employees see it differently. As far as I know, Maxess was a complete failure. And that sounds about right. Said one of these people, pointing to the company's debts and the fact that employees were pushed to work for free. I don't know how he could possibly call that a success. Well, I meant my ice business, which is worth $0, which I suspect is worth more than that, but he was getting divorced, so he said it was worth 0, so he wouldn't have to pay his wife any money in a divorce. A good, honest guy. Isn't that great? All right, let's see. Oh, I should also note, at least in passing here, that there's more reporting, and I just happened to see it in Mother Jones, their version of it here, that the January 6th rioter who dragged a police officer into the crowd, and we're talking here about Officer Michael Fanone, as you say, Fanone or Fanone, who's been widely publicized in his testimony before the January 6th committee. The rioter who assaulted him and dragged him into the crowd got 7.5 years in prison. the other day. On Thursday, that's the other day, yesterday, a U.S. District Court judge sentenced a January 6th riot to 7 years and 6 months in prison for dragging D.C. police officer Fanone, I've missed my cue for the music, into the crowd, and an act that resulted in one of the most brutal attacks of that day. Albuquerque Cosper Head. That's the person's name. His name is Albuquerque. He's not from Albuquerque. Maybe he is both, but Albuquerque Cosper Head, a 34-year-old man from Tennessee, responsible for forcibly removing Fanone from a tunnel into the crowd of angry rioters who proceeded to beat him and shocked him with a stun gun at the base of his skull.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I realize with the music having been late that my cue for the exit was off, and so you may not have heard the end of the description of the attack on Officer Fanone, but I think you all know the story. But this person with the very unusual name of Albuquerque Cosper Head dragged Officer Fanone into the crowd, proceeded to beat him, and shocked him with a stun gun at the base of his skull. And the sentencing handled by Judge Amy Berman Jackson, who's handling so many of these rioter cases. Well, you know, she was a little tough on him, as she should have been. It sounds like she may even have gone easy on him, given what he actually did here. Before sentencing, Judge Amy Berman Jackson told Head he was your prey, he was your trophy. Head, who declined to address the court, is one of the hundreds of Trump supporters charged for their roles in storming the Capitol in a violent attempt to overturn the 2020 election results. The ex-construction worker who pled guilty in April has received one of the longest sentences of the convicted insurrectionists so far, second only to ex-NYPD officer who was given nearly 10 years last month. Head's sentence is only 6 months shy of the maximum 8 years for the charges. The details of the attack are shocking. According to prosecutors, Head yelled, "I got one," before grabbing Fanone around his neck and dragging him before the crowd. Head then held the officer in place as the crowd proceeded to beat and tase him repeatedly, leaving burn marks at the base of his neck. Body camera footage captured Fanone losing consciousness for more than 2 minutes during the assault. Court records also state that Head attempted to remove Fanone's weapon from its holster. The former officer recounted the details of this attack during his testimony at the first congressional hearing during the January 6th investigation. As my colleague Ine O previously reported, and we're speaking again here, I didn't give proper credit to Ariana Coghill writing for Mother Jones here, but citing the previous work of Ine O, the quote from Fanone, "I was grabbed, beaten, tased, all while being called a traitor to my country," Officer Michael Fanone told lawmakers in his opening statement. "I was at the risk of being stripped of and killed with my own firearm as I heard chants of 'kill him with his own gun.' I can still hear those words in my head." It's not a great chant, by the way, but not a great idea either. During the sentencing hearing, Fanone said that he suffered a heart attack and sustained a traumatic brain injury from the attack, ending his career in law enforcement. While he's gained some fame from his testimony and even secured a book deal, he said he still misses the life he had before. I would trade all of this attention to return to policing, but I can't do that, he said, according to reports from the LA Times. And the catalyst for my loss of career and the suffering that I've endured in the past 18 months is Albuquerque Head, which is, again, an unbelievable name. There are more than 900 people who have been federally charged for their actions on January 6th. Donald Trump and his former chief of staff were both recently subpoenaed for various election interference investigations. Meanwhile, there are currently 291 election deniers who are running for office. The dark shadow of tyranny, unfortunately, has not gone away, Judge Jackson said at the hearing. There are people who are still disseminating the lie that the election was stolen. They're doing it today. And the people who are stoking that anger for their own selfish purposes, they need to think about the havoc they've wreaked and the lives they've ruined. All true, but I have a feeling that they're not actually spending any time thinking about it. But good advice from Judge Jackson. Let's see. Other interesting items that perhaps we could share here. What is this one? I have to check. This one comes from the Miami Herald, which is behind a paywall. And I'm not certain which story that is, unless it's this one next to it, reported by, maybe not. All right. Well, this is interesting, to say the least. But is this necessarily the direction we want to go? It's an interesting story, but I should sweep through the rest of Pocket just quickly and see some of the other things that I know I've been saving for later in the week, and we're there now. And let's see. Maybe we actually have caught up on the vast majority of these things. Well, okay. This piece here, did we get to read about this? I think we mentioned that this was happening, but I guess we should spend a little bit of time. This is, again, another extremely long story, and I don't even think, even with the last half hour dedicated to it, we can get through all of it. But if you haven't read this profile, since we were reading some of the profiles of the people running for office, particularly out to the west, we did Nevada, we did New Mexico. Now we'll focus on Arizona. They're really growing them out there in Arizona. We've heard plenty about Kari Lake, the GOP gubernatorial candidate, who seems like poised to possibly actually win the election there. She just seems to be a particularly weird and dangerous type of candidate. And I think this profile from the Washington Post helps illustrate some of that. And you might want to spend some time over the weekend, if you haven't read it yet, taking a look at it. It's from October 16th, so you've had a couple of weekends to take a look at it. Maybe you've already seen it. On Kari Lake's campaign for Arizona governor, the mic is always hot. That's the title of the piece, written by Ruby Kramer. Subheader here reads, the former Phoenix TV news anchor has emerged as a Republican phenom by amplifying Donald Trump's lie, of course, that the 2020 election was stolen and embracing the hard right politics of abortion and immigration. What I took away from my brief skim of the story when I got a chance to look at it was she has a rather unique twist on how she runs things in her campaign. It's very Trump-esque in that it's very much focused on image building, but that my takeaway from it, and it might not be what the writer would have hoped I would take away from it, is that she tends to try and run her campaign in a very interesting and unique way. Not only the mic always being hot, but you'll see why that's the case early on in the profile, but that she travels around with a little gaggle of 20-something campaign staffers whose job mainly is to stand behind her holding signs, wall her off from anybody that might otherwise be heckling or jeering her, and to laugh and titter at every insult she levies against either whoever might be trying to ask her questions or her opponents or whatever. And they just stand around basically high-fiving and saying sick burn to everything so that it looks like she's wildly popular, but she's the meanest mean girl in the state. And that's supposed to be how you win an election, which is kind of amazing to me. Anyway, Let's dive right into the story and read as much as we can. If you'd like to speak with Kari Lake, there are some things you should know. First, one is that Kari Lake does not say, which I do. Why not? I don't know. Kari Lake's words are crisp and clean, and when needed, they can be warm or they can be harsh. The more confrontational you are, the more composed Kari Lake will become. People have said Kari Lake is Donald Trump in heels, but really she is Donald Trump with media training and polish. Her sentences are perfectly complete. She doesn't have that problem. Her hair is cropped into a familiar pixie cut left over from 22 years on the anchor desk at Channel 10, the Fox affiliate in Phoenix, where she entered living rooms every weeknight at 5 and 9. The name Kari Lake, the first and last, is known by virtually everyone in Arizona. It has power. When Kari Lake walks into a room, all eyes turn to Kari Lake. She is one of those people. Okay, so maybe a natural politician, right? The other thing you should know is this. When Kari Lake walks into a room, there will be a small lavalier microphone clipped to the collar of her dress or the lapel of her shirt. The microphone is the operational heart of Lake's Republican campaign to become governor of Arizona. It's not the one she holds on stage, amplifying her voice to a crowd of supporters. Rather, it is connected to a camera operated by her husband, Jeff Halperin, a former videographer for the NBC affiliate in Phoenix, who has run his own production company for the past 20 years. He is a constant presence, tall and bearded, at every Kari Lake rally, on the edge of every Kari Lake news conference, inside the room for every Kari Lake interview with a reporter. His lens is always trained in position, which is to say, on his wife, and on you, the person on the other side of the exchange. When Kari Lake campaigns, she's also making television. A little bit of a Truman Show situation. The microphone is there whenever Stacey Barchenger, the Arizona Republic reporter assigned to cover Lake, tries to ask a question. Not you, the candidate tells Barchenger, looking her in the eye before calling on another journalist in what has become a familiar bit on the trail. It is there, the microphone, when a CNN reporter tries to ask for an interview. I'll do an interview, Lake says, as long as it airs on CNN Plus. Does that still exist? I didn't think so. It is there when Dennis Welch, political editor for Phoenix's 3 TV and CBS 5, tries to question Lake, only to have Lake question the questioner. I don't even know. Do you guys have any viewers left? The interactions are packaged into videos, content for her campaign to release and weaponize on social media. Kari Lake exposes bias. Kari Lake goes mega viral after exposing fake news. Watch Kari Lake put the Arizona Republic in its place. Lake's microphone captures the magnetism she brings to the stage. It also amplifies the existential danger Democrats see in her candidacy, from her election denialism to her restrictive abortion agenda to the national platform she could assume. But more than that, it is wielded as a weapon and a threat. On a recent Wednesday evening, after a Hispanic forum in the Maryville neighborhood of Phoenix, a campaign staffer pulls me into a small back room. The lights are bright fluorescent. Live Latin music. What's Live Latin? Maybe that's a festival. I don't know. Live Latin music from the stage comes booming through the walls. The night before, a campaign aide texted to say Lake would grant a short interview. Now here comes the rules. Please don't wear jeans, and we ask that you stay away from purple tops. Thank you, the aide wrote, clarifying the next morning that they were, quote, kidding about the jeans. Inside the room, a chair is waiting for me. Lake is wearing royal blue, not purple. So you're not allowed to wear purple tops because she wears purple tops, and you can't have what she has, I guess. Seeing Halperin point his camera in the direction of our faces, as well as a large boom mic hanging inches overhead, I ask if I'm being recorded. You are being recorded, Lake confirms. She asks if it's okay. I tell her it's not my favorite thing. Well, it's not my favorite either, the candidate says, but we feel we have to because the media has been so unfair that we feel we have to record everything. She explains that the campaign releases the recording only if we feel we've been misrepresented. If everything goes great, Lake says, it's nothing to worry about. After spending her life in TV news, Lake, 53, propelled herself to the top of the GOP ticket in Arizona by claiming, falsely, that President Biden's election was stolen from Trump by embracing the hard-right politics of abortion, immigration, pandemic-era mandates, and critical race theory, and by casting her television career and her former colleagues, journalists who were once her friends, as part of what she calls the corrupt and immoral fake news media. As a candidate, Lake has sought to use her TV news credentials to her advantage. I know Arizona, she often says, while simultaneously discrediting the entire enterprise. No one else involved in the media could possibly know Arizona, just me. Friends from Channel 10 knew Lake as a more free-spirited than Bible-loving person. They say she was into Buddhism, loved her regular vacations to Jamaica, everyone would, right? Became swept up in the energy around President Barack Obama, interestingly enough, threw big parties at her house, went out to gay bars, and thrived on cultivating a television audience with the same instinct they see in her new life as a candidate for governor. In the years after Trump's 2016 election, her politics shifted to the right in ways her colleagues found unpredictable and bewildering. On March 2nd, 2021, she left journalism altogether, and within 3 months, she launched her first campaign for office. Now she is weeks from a possible victory, driven by the energy of voters young and old, and by a Democratic opponent, Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, who not only refuses to debate Lake, but has struggled to communicate in the most basic ways, according to these guys. Arizona is both a foundational home for hard-right politics — it gave rise to Barry Goldwater in the 1960s — and an increasingly viable target for Democrats. The state will determine future presidents, as it did in 2020. And if Lake wins, she will help oversee the management of its elections, possibly in partnership with Arizona's Republican candidate for Secretary of State, Mark Fincham, who has led the conspiracy assertions that mass fraud was at work in 2020. Lake has claimed, falsely, that Trump was the real winner of Arizona, repeating the lie with a frequency and conviction that thrills the former president and his supporters. It's funny, Lake told an audience this summer. I talked to President Trump. He goes, I love it. No matter what I ask you, you always bring it back to the election. I can ask you what the weather's like in Arizona, and you'll say, well, it's nice, but how do I enjoy it when our elections are stolen and we don't have a country? That's hilarious. The Carrie Lake campaign has become a phenomenon in Arizona. It spans multiple demographics. It draws huge crowds on a day's notice. People arrive in Lake gear, in Trump t-shirts, in cowboy hats. Lake works the crowd, and an eddy of staff and security circles the woman at its center. Before she faces the press, a posse of supporters appears as if out of nowhere, lining up behind the candidate to form a human backdrop. When the cameras roll, they grip their Carrie Lake signs and smile. And here, Lake takes over. She picks public fights with the press at almost every opportunity, to the delight of her followers and her staff, a collection of 20-somethings who snicker as she tees off, their mouths agape in admiration. It's a show they've all seen before but never grow tired of watching, and it's on display from the moment I introduce myself to Lake. Is this paper owned by... Who is it owned by? She asks. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, owns the Washington Post. Oh, I thought so, she says, her voice turning hard. You don't give anybody fair coverage, unfortunately. She walks away, and a gaggle of Lake staffers are waiting, laughing. That was going to happen. That was going to happen, one of them says. She's actually like that all the time. She's real, says another. It's not staged, he added. It's real. Great. That's terrific that it's real. And by the way, I was thinking about the purple top thing. I guess everything being stage managed. She doesn't want two people in the same color because it doesn't present the right visual balance. So the rule is I get to wear what I want and you have to work around me. Otherwise, I cancel the interview because you're all a bunch of liars anyway. On a Tuesday morning in October, Lake is preparing to take the stage with Kristi Noem, the 50-year-old Republican governor of South Dakota, who could be Lake's closest political contemporary should she win in November. The event is a Coffee with Christie and Carrie, both, by the way, spelled with K's and I's, and just the way it is, I guess. Not coffee, obviously, but Coffee with Christie and Carrie, but behind a rack of makeshift curtains in a small holding room backstage, staffers instead drink tallboy cans of Monster Energy as they monitor a playlist of jams, J-A-M-Z, all caps, jams coming through the loudspeakers. Vape plumes fill the air. Oh boy. When the two women arrive, a man in the crowd, intrigued, pulls out his phone and types Christy Gnome into Google Images, scrolling through photos. On stage beside her, Lake repeatedly identifies Gnome as one of the country's two strong governors, the other being Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, leaving out the other 26 currently serving from her party, including Arizona's own, the term-limited Doug Ducey. She makes only passing reference to Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, who is scheduled to visit Phoenix on Wednesday to campaign on behalf of Lake at 2 rallies and 2 fundraisers, according to a campaign aide, because Youngkin is such a moderate and a strictly business guy and yada yada. Anyway, we found out later he shows up and tries to actually make a Youngkin Lake presidential ticket happen. Anyway, a day after appearing with Gnome at a saloon-style restaurant in Queen Creek, Lake speaks at a rally with Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who watches from an outdoor pagoda, beneath a sign that reads, "If there are idiots in power, it is because those who elected them are well represented." During her speech, Lake calls for Cruz to replace that old bat, Mitch McConnell, as the top Republican in the U.S. Senate. The crowd roars. "You know what sounds really good? Senate Majority Leader Ted Cruz," Lake says. Cruz gives an awkward smile and clenches his plastic water bottle. 4 days later, Lake is the star warm-up speaker at a Trump rally in Mesa. Waiting in a holding room for the former president to arrive, a young staffer retrieves a vacuum to clean the red carpet laid out before a backdrop reserved for taking pictures with Trump. Lake walks over and asks to finish the job herself, the vacuum cord snaking around the heel of her black stiletto. She is on camera, of course, and the following day, photos spread on Twitter and Instagram. How humble, right? Watching Lake campaign across Arizona is an exercise in observing the new Republican Party at work. Lake is not unlike the 20-somethings on her campaign. They are people who crafted an identity in Republican politics, not by studying the arc of conservatism in America, but by watching Trump. Lake shares Trump's understanding of performance and theater. Former colleagues and friends say Lake was not the most academically minded of the anchors at Channel 10, but she was certainly the savviest. When the pandemic arrived, Lake's husband, Halprin, helped design a home studio with perfect depth and smooth sepia tones, soft and glossy, like an Instagram filter. "The way to a woman's heart is through lighting and photography," she wrote in a post on Facebook. When station managers asked on-air talent to expand their presence on social media, maintaining a screen in the newsroom to track journalists' likes and follows, Lake quickly rose to the top of the leaderboard. The staff called it the Hunger Games, but Lake took the exercise seriously, former colleagues said, showing off the activity on her accounts. Instinctively, she understood that including questions in her posts like, "What do you guys think?" helped create a more lively and committed following, probably true, even if disingenuous. According to one former colleague, 12 people who knew Lake from Phoenix's TV market agreed to interviews for this story, some speaking on the condition of anonymity to reflect candidly on the candidate. In 2019, Lake got in trouble at Channel 10 for joining the far-right social media site Parler and promoting the account on her professional Twitter page. "This is my first post on Parler," she posted that June. "Sounds like this is the only social media site that is actually putting the First Amendment first. Bravo." By July, someone had leaked hot mic video footage from the Channel 10 newsroom showing Lake and her longtime co-anchor John Hook discussing the controversy. "I think they just think it's been branded as a far-right kind of a place," Hook told her as they prepared to go live, warning that the station could get blowback from places like Phoenix New Times, an alt weekly that covered local media. "F them," Lake said. "That's a rag for selling marijuana." I know, Hook replied, but then they're in a position where they've got to explain it, or you've got to explain it. The exchange blew up because of Lake's coarse language, but what stands out now is her rationale for joining Parler in the first place. I'm reaching people, Lake told Hook. As a first-time candidate for office, Lake has an intuitive sense for a crowd and the staging of an event. In January, she spoke at her first Trump rally, her first encounter with an audience of that scale, at least that she could see, I suppose, and she walked to the lectern before thousands of people, or as she walked, Lake knew exactly what to do. She threw out her arms and stared in awe at the scene before her, giving the photographers the shot they wanted. Republicans in the state had tried to persuade Lake to run for Congress, but no, she told them she wanted to be governor. Okay. One of the people Lake consulted after leaving Channel 10 was Sal DiCiccio, maybe? A Phoenix city councilman, an outspoken conservative who became a friend after Lake interviewed him years prior. I said, Congress would be a slam dunk for you, Carrie, DiCiccio recalled, but she was very clear. Her heart was in Arizona. She goes, this is where I think. DiCiccio cut himself off. No, not think, he said. She never says I think. She said, this is where I believe I can make the greatest impact. DiCiccio supported Lake's Republican primary opponent, actually, Karen Taylor, Karrin, all the K's and 2 R's in that. Karen Taylor Robson, a well-funded, establishment-friendly candidate to whom he had made a prior commitment to endorse. When he told Lake he couldn't stand behind her in the primary, DiCiccio said she didn't hold it against him. Of all the politicians I've worked with, she understood that the most, he said. She's very assured of herself. Last spring, as she prepared to enter the race, Lake worked with Blake Wilson, a Phoenix-based Republican political brand designer, to create her first campaign logo. She told Wilson she wanted something that would, quote, project confidence, he recalled. I'm sure, why not? She also asked to see an option that closely resembled Trump's aesthetic. The mock-up Wilson produced mimicked his big block. I've got my volume still all the way up from when we were playing the pronunciation. She asked to see an option that closely resembled, the Trump aesthetic, and then he brought her his big block sans serif lettering with Carrie Lake printed beneath a row of 5 stars, but Lake decided against it. She liked another option better, a distinctive maroon with a font and cactus icon styled after Arizona's 1980s license plate. Lake carries Trump's America First banner aggressively and without apology, but she has also made this campaign her own. When you ask people who Carrie Lake's campaign manager is, they'll tell you it's Carrie Lake. The staff below her is an unlikely assortment. There is Colton Duncan. I love people with 2 first names. Colton Duncan, a 27-year-old operative from Texas who met Lake at a dinner last spring and moved to Arizona the following day. Weirdo. Where he can now be seen running around campaign events, harried on an iPhone pressed to his ear. There is Field Director Matthew Martinez, just 21 years old. There is Senior Advisor Caroline Wren, 35, a long-time Republican fundraiser, 35, who served as Trump's 2020 National Finance Director and helped raise funds for the January 6, 2021 rally at the Ellipse, where Trump called on his supporters to march to the U.S. Capitol. Wren's lawyer, parenthetically, has said she was not present at the Capitol or the Capitol grounds that day. That's a fun claim. And then there is Lake's best friend, Lisa Dale, a 51-year-old former news anchor who is running campaign operations and is a constant by the candidate's side. In September, the team asked Jared Small, a longtime Republican advance staffer, to help professionalize the campaign's events, working hand-in-hand with Lake's husband to make sure the visuals are just so. It is easy to view Katie Hobbs as Lake's opposite. The Democrat oversaw the contentious 2020 election in Arizona as Secretary of State and served as minority leader in the state Senate, but struggles as a messenger on the trail. At the Arizona Capitol, reporters would often ask her to repeat her answers because sentences would trail off, making her meaning difficult to decipher, one reporter said. Of course, same thing with Trump and me, by the way. During the primary, Hobbs declined to debate her Democratic opponent, despite the fact that he posed little threat to her campaign. She won with 72% of the vote. She has since refused to share a stage with Lake, producing a weeks-long saga over debate rules and an uncomfortable running contrast. When Hobbs didn't show at a voter forum earlier this month, Lake stood for more than an hour next to an empty podium labeled Katie Hobbs, in case there was any confusion about her absence. "I have no desire to be a part of the spectacle that she's looking to create," Hobbs said on CBS's Face the Nation a few days later. I can actually sympathize. I think it's a decision that would have been difficult to come to, but I can understand where she's coming from, even if it's just not going to work. It's the same worry you hear from reporters on the campaign trail. If you engage, you risk starring in Lake's next video. That's the bottom line of it. Well, we only made it about a little more than halfway through the article, but you get the idea of what's going on here. I can give you one more paragraph before we exit. When Lake was nearing her 20th anniversary at Channel 10, she granted an interview to the Arizona Republic about the pressures women face over their public appearance. She said she got feedback from viewers about how she looked. The criticism didn't bother her, she told the paper, because she held the experience of being an on-air at a certain remove. You really become that character when you are in costume, she said. Every role we play has a uniform. Tracking Lake's journey to her current role has been an exasperating prospect for many who knew her as an anchor in Phoenix. A spiral of questions with no end. You'll have to ask and answer, or attempt to answer those questions for yourself, perhaps over the weekend. I will, of course, provide you with a link to do just that, and provide you with what's coming up next. Justice Putnam, of course, with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and he's got a couple of great stories on tap to share with you, including, let's see, he kicks off by saying Donald Trump and his allies continue to assert executive privilege as a way to dodge providing testimony in criminal investigations.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Hey, by the way, controversy going on the other side of the country, too. North Carolina GOP Senate nominee Ted Budd, the man with 3 Ds in his short name, was part of a business scheme accused of defrauding farmers, and Georgia DA Fani Willis urged the Supreme Court to allow Lindsey Graham's testimony. Time to get that taken care of next, too. See you next week.